land is your land, this land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me.
Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to the 40th Right and Left Discussion Forum. The purpose of our discussion forum is to demonstrate that civility not only matters, but that it is the backbone of a peaceful and prosperous society. Without civility, neither peace nor prosperity can survive. Our topic today is the federal minimum wage and what is its real impact on our poverty problem. Does it do more harm than good? Our panel today, beginning on my left, is Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, retired senior research chemist. On his left is Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&B Financial Services. And on his left is Patty Haskins, retired math teacher and current member of Wadsworth City Council. And on her left, for a second time on our panel, is Dave Scott, retired writer for the Akron Beacon Journal. I turn now to Ron. Ron, the merits of federal minimum wage have been argued since its inception back in the mid-30s. Usually with compassion on one side and economic reality on the other. Where do you come down on this issue? Is minimum wage a net benefit to the working poor, or is it a detriment in the long run?
John, I must confess I'm out of my element here. Economics, like other social sciences, is not hard science. I'm used to finding a fact, doing the experiment enough times to replicate it, finding out what the limits of error on it. You don't do that with economics. The reading I've done on it recently, thanks to you to pointing me to some interesting arguments to read. The economic theorists say, well, even a little bit would hurt, even a little bit would cause a ripple through the job market to make jobs less available if you go with minimum wage rather than what the market wage really is. On the other side, you have people who say, well, that's fine, but the data so far don't prove that. As long as you don't make too large a perturbation in the status quo, and the $9 that's being promoted right now would be within that criterion, you don't get a whole lot of effect. On the lower end, there may be 1 or 2% of job loss, but that gets made up. There's a lot of churning in the lower end, people leaving one job for a better job, and so on and so forth. Not much data involved. Article in the paper just the other day about a small community near Seattle which put in a $15 an hour minimum. Many states do have minimum wages which are above the federal minimum wage. Mm-hmm. It happened as it happens. It's affected a relatively small number of people, only a few thousand. But there have been, of course, the usual business interests testifies, oh, this will be terrible, we'll lose jobs, we won't be able to expand, we have to make up this somehow, we'll charge higher prices. So far, several of those businesses have expanded their businesses. One franchisee in the city of Seattle nearby said that they would lose it, they would have no problem. They've added 5 new franchises, even though Seattle is on the verge of passing a $15 an hour minimum wage. Mm-hmm. So there's little data one way or the other. And I think you state it well. Economic theory or reality, as you say, on one side, and compassion on the other. As a liberal, I come down on the side of compassion. I've volunteered at a homeless shelter in Connecticut for a bit, and there were folks there who had jobs, minimum wage jobs, didn't have houses, rode public transportation to get from town to town to go to their job at McDonald's or wherever. Mm-hmm. Those folks could use a little boost. Mm-hmm. And part of that theory and part of that observation is that when people are given a little more money on the minimum wage area, they spend it. Mm-hmm. They're not saving it, they're not putting it away for college, they're spending it. Mm-hmm. The argument against that is that what you really need to do is change the whole situation. You need to make education funds available. You need to retrain people. You need to do all that. Mm-hmm. You need to have both the earned income retirement on the earned income credit, and you need maybe perhaps a minimum wage increase. And I would agree that that's probably, mm-hmm. you need a multi-pronged attack here. Mm-hmm. These problems are not simple, and they don't lend themselves to simple solutions. Mm-hmm. But I'm out of my element. It's not the kind of data I'm used to working with.
But you are in your element, Bryan. And
Somewhat, yeah.
As a hard scientist, Ron finds it difficulty to refer to economics as a hard science. What do you think?
Well, I think that money flows very easily to countries, states that have a better economic environment to create jobs and to maintain jobs and to build a business. I think Ron brings up some very good points, and I think raising the minimum wage is a very small little Band-Aid. I really don't think it gets to the heart of the issue that we're dealing with here in this country. I worked my way through college as a server at a local restaurant, and I think at the time the minimum wage for those types of jobs might have been in the $2 an hour range. I never brought home $2 an hour because of the tips that were available. So I don't think the jobs that people are in right now that pay minimum wage are supposed to be careers. I don't believe that they're supposed to be types of jobs that you are supposed to be able to have a mortgage on and to have multiple cars and to put your kids through school. I think those are entry-level jobs that people come in, they get training, they move on. I think most big businesses will say that they're entry-level positions. Some pay much more than a minimum wage because the market dictates in particular areas how much that wage needs to be. I think if you go to North Dakota, I read an article, it wasn't that long ago, because of fracking and because of the coal, the tar sands up there, they're paying their workers starting at $15, $18 an hour plus a $5,000 bonus to work at McDonald's because they have a hard time finding people to work the French fryer. And that's what we're dealing with here. So I think that the answer to this is more than just raising the minimum wage. I don't think we need to get into class warfare here. I think some of the things that have been said about needing a fair wage and a living wage, I think that just stokes some things we just don't need to to deal with. But economics would tell you that when you raise wages, businesses will look for other ways to provide that same service for a lesser cost.
Moving offshore.
Moving it offshore. I mean, I saw a little thing on one of those little things on the internet where raise the minimum wage and basically a McDonald's cuts down 3 or 4 people because you talking to that speaker, and that speaker is not the person in the McDonald's. It's actually someone else. In off-site, offshore, in India, and once again, I read an article, it was about 2 years ago, where there was a company that was, pioneering that type of stuff, call centers for a variety of things. So, I think we need to look at more than just raising the wage. We need to get into education. We need to get these people skills that are marketable, and I think that's the real answer.
Okay. Patty, what do you think?
Well, addressing a couple of things that Bryan said, there was a study in the 1990s, I believe, and it was by Alan Kruger and David Card from Princeton University. And they specifically studied the fast food industry in New Jersey as compared to the fast food industry in Pennsylvania, in which case, I guess New Jersey had just set a new minimum wage. They had raised it. And they wanted to see if that caused workers to be laid off, if there was a problem and they said everything mirrored itself. One of the things they found in the fast food industry which is where a lot of the minimum wage people are, which, by the way, are not your typical teenagers anymore. I think the average age in fast food industry is like 27, 28 now. So there are quite a few people that, even though they never wanted that to be a career, that's the job that they are supporting. But what they found was they'd raised the price. Now, I saw figures last evening that I was looking through, and they said if you have a 10% raise in the minimum wage, this would produce a 4% raise in food cost, because that tends to be the area where they pass it on. So if your hamburger is $3, it's going to raise it 12 cents, which most people aren't even going to blink an eyelash at. Overall, it would raise costs 0.4%, which is a very low amount.
This is for a 10% increase in minimum
This is for a
wage.
10% increase in minimum wage.
$7.
So from 7.25, it would take you up to about 8. Now, there is still a concern about loss of jobs, and I saw the CBO figures, which said that if we raise the minimum wage to $10 an hour, that it would cost 500,000 jobs,
Yes.
possibly. However, it would also raise the wages of 16.5 million people. And this was CBO, if they raised it to $9 an hour, which is I think the figure that's being touted
Yes.
the most commonly now, it could cost as many as 100,000 jobs, but it would also increase the wages of 7.6 million people. So you kind of want to weigh the benefits. I fall along the same lines as Ron, though. I mean, when you look at minimum wage jobs, and there are people that are supporting their families right now, they're making $11,000 a year. And that's if they can work full time, which most of the time they can't. I know there is a concern that if you do raise the minimum wage, all these companies are going to put people on part-time. The minimum wage job workers probably are working part-time. You don't see full-time people at McDonald's and at Burger King and at Pizza Hut. These are part-time workers. That was done years ago, even before the Affordable Care Act came in.
Mm-hmm.
So you have people that are working 2, 3, 4 of these part-time jobs just to get a 40-hour week, just so that they can earn $11,000 without health insurance and try to support, try to support themselves. They might have a family. Obviously, if you have people with those wages, they're also probably getting subsidies from the government. And one of the ways, we could cut down on those subsidies from the government, if you raise the minimum wage, these people would no longer qualify for subsidies. Right now, they're looking at it as a situation where possibly, should I work or not? Because I can't support my family on this job, but I can get a little more if I am on the welfare line, and that's kind of a scary situation as well. So.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
So.
I remember about 20 years ago, a place that I worked with came up with a classification that still makes me scratch my head. It's called the permanent part-time temporary.
Sounds like the post office.
George Orwell's rolling.
Well, and the other thing too is, and when we look at the raises, the buying power of the minimum wage now is the same as the buying power, I think, as it was back in 1968.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know I was working in 1968, my part-time job, and the minimum wage was $1.60 at that time. And, so that $1.60 bought me as much as $7.25 does now.
I got you all beat. I worked for 50 cents an hour in 1958.
Oh.
David, you're with us again. We enjoy having you here.
I think it's time for us to challenge the idea that the principles of supply and demand are laws. And a lot of the things that happen are considered as inviolate when in fact they're really choices. There are not enough decisions made based on what we think are right. A lot of people think that, for instance, you mentioned that these jobs are not supposed to be career jobs. Well, who says? Many people are destined and almost locked in to the necessity to work in these part-time jobs. So when you say that, you're kind of locking them into poverty. And you're also saying that to support them with these minimum wage jobs that are under what they need to get along, you're saying that this company needs to have government surplus, government support to keep these people alive, basically. I heard that there are $7 billion in public support for the employees of fast food restaurants. Another thing that we've got to remember is that yes, there are costs to things. We can't end the discussion by saying this will raise costs or eliminate jobs. It's got to go beyond that, and we've got to say, well, okay, but is this decision worthwhile to proceed, even if we lose some jobs, even if we increase some taxes? You know, and all of these things are often measured in temporary terms. You know, 1 year, 2 years. Well, now it's been, what, 10 years since the minimum wage has gone up. That's a long-term effect. So, you know, yes, economists tend to come out with decisions that conform with their worldview. And yes, that does prove that there's no hard science in that. But there is something to be said about a society making a choice and accepting the costs for it and adjusting as things go along, because there is no hard science when you're dealing with society and people and so many variables as you have in economics. It's possible we could reach a point where the minimum wage goes down, but we need to be more open-minded about the needs of the people who are never going to be educable. There are millions of people in America who are never going to get even their GED. And I think we have a responsibility to pay attention to their needs and make reasoned, responsible decisions about what their fate should be.
Bravo, Dave. Bravo. I agree with that. And
Why am I
the thing
not
about putting
surprised?
into oh well, one of the things about this raise and so forth, the administration's proposal also suggests, along with the $9, of indexing it to cost of living in some way or another. And I think the bad thing, and all the hard data that I've seen shows that if it's a big jump, well, what happens is now we raise the minimum wage, and then we argue about it for 10 years, and then we make a big jump on it. Well, of course this is going to be disruptive to society. But if we raise it a bit at a time, link it to some economic indicator which we know is rising and falling, then it's less of a disruption. Employers can plan for it. It should be less of a problem.
I think the point that's made is that somehow there are no actual problems that come up with that. All we have to do is look at a very basic fundamental principle, and that is along the lines of states. People are leaving the state of Ohio, and why are they doing that? They're leaving because A, the tax rate is too high. They're leaving because there are no jobs. And New Jersey, that's a perfect example. New Jersey is losing, I don't know what the figure is exactly, but it's into the hundreds of thousands of jobs. They've lost, if you believe their state statistics, they've had, I don't know how many billions of dollars walk out. States need to compete with people, and when we start saying that, well, our state's going to do this because it feels good for everybody, those jobs leave. I'm all for helping people and creating a safety net, but I don't want to give up on people. I don't want anybody to think that, my view locks people into a life of servitude, but I think that most people want to get the training. We've been spending the money hand over fist as far as the federal government, the state governments to help people. I'm for giving those people a hand up, but I don't think just raising the minimum wage is going to get us to where we need to be, given the nature of how we operate. Capital is free flowing. Look at the inversions that are taking place. You've got a Treasury Department that seems to think that they can stop this. Treasury doesn't make laws. Companies left and right are doing things within our own tax code to become more profitable. I believe in growing the top line. More people working is better than less people working at a higher wage. So,
does that mean that you favor a federal minimum wage over a state minimum wage?
I would believe that if we had a minimum wage that worked with, depending upon where the state was, let the state determine that. I don't believe the federal government, it was 10-10 there for a while, now it's 9. I really don't think the federal government has that big of a handle on what the states need.
But then you just said that if the states set their own minimum wage and they set it high, all the jobs will flow to those who pay a pauper's wage. So aren't you arguing essentially for no minimum wage at all?
I think Ron made the point that if the states increase their minimum wage, the Seattle thing, I'm for letting the market determine what a minimum wage is.
But doesn't the market create situations that have extreme poverty?
I think on either end you'll have extreme poverty and extreme wealth.
What do you mean by either end?
Well, the spectrum of the economic, benefit to everything. When you look at, there are some people that are always, if you believe that, always going to be in poverty, and there's going to be some people that we continue to harp on because they make too much. That's about free enterprise. And free enterprise is competition. We have competition in the market. Who's to say that in North Dakota, the market doesn't dictate what the minimum wage is?
So you're saying that our policy should be set by free enterprise rather than public policy?
I think so. I think free enterprise is a much better indicator of what people are worth than saying someone from the central government saying, okay, we have to spend $7.25 or $10.10. Take a survey around. I don't know how much Walmart is paying.
So if you believe that all people should be paid what they're worth, do you accept the idea that some people should be paid nothing?
No. No, I don't believe that, and I think that's the extreme.
Yeah, so what is your point then? How do you mitigate that argument?
The point is that businesses competing for labor determine what that wage is.
And in some cases that'll be nothing because they're not employable.
And they're not going to hire anyone.
Yeah.
Then they won't
So what are we going to do
anyone.
with those people?
So then the company doesn't have anybody to work? I think if you
Then
look
there
at
is no company.
there's no company. I really don't think you can just sit back and say, okay, we're going to dictate to people who you're going to hire, how you're going to hire them. I don't think that works.
But you accept the consequences of that policy.
I think as a society we have accepted, because look at the welfare rolls that we have on the federal government right now. How many people are actually on the welfare rolls? I think that the whole system is broke, not just minimum wage, but the people that need the training, that need the help. They're not getting it, and they're not moving out of that. They're constantly thinking, well, I'm going to be stuck in this job. I don't believe that.
So if you find that unacceptable, what do you want to change?
I want to change the way the government helps people out of these issues.
Yeah.
That's what I want to change.
But if you cut
I want to
welfare
change
and
the
you don't
welfare
raise the
program.
minimum
I'm not saying you cut the welfare program.
Well,
I'm not saying-
we're spending $1 trillion a year, $1 trillion a year, and our poverty rate hangs in there at about 15%, no matter what the federal government does. But let me switch this around just a tad bit. There's always the question of just who is impacted by minimum wage. Now, there are indeed 39 states that have a minimum wage, but 19 of them are at or below the federal minimum wage law. Now, there are, as some of you have indicated, depending on whose ox is being gored, there are all kinds of numbers being flown around. But the one that seems very consistent, there are currently 75 million people working for a minimum wage. Now, the minimum hourly wage. But there are people working on salaries that are below minimum wage as well. But of the 75 million people, 3.5 million are on minimum wage. Right now, 3.5 million are on minimum wage. 1.7 million of those are between the ages of 16 and 24. There's a professor at the University of Georgia who makes a sort of a sweeping comment that most people on minimum wage are not poor. These are second and third incomes and so forth. We like to think about the single mom, 3 kids, and trying to support them. But the question is, how big is that population of really poor people that are on minimum wage? And is the best solution really to raise the minimum wage or raise the income tax credit for the people that are really need the money?
At the moment, that doesn't kick in till age 25. So, and it ends in the 60s, I think, age 60, something of that sort. The numbers I saw. So the folks, the retirees who are trying to eke out the Social Security and the teenagers and the young families aren't covered with that anyway. So again, you need a multi-pronged attack.
Yeah, I believe so. My sympathies tend to lean toward the small businessman, who somebody pointed out is the chief job creator in this country, and that and I'm as benevolent as the next guy, but when we're talking about being compassionate, it's easy to be compassionate with somebody else's money. Where if we use the income tax credit or fashioned it, changed it, whatever, to find a way to support people that are in dire poverty, the working poor, which kind of get worked over by the government and everybody else, why can't we all share?
I would propose to you that creating the minimum wage and increasing the price of hamburgers is having more people pay for it than increasing the earned income credit. That we would all pay, all of us hamburger eaters anyway, would be sharing in that cost more than the taxpayers were. We all know that our tax is not even. It's just a matter of how we're going to do this and who's going to pay. We shouldn't shirk away from the idea that we're going to have to pay for this. We will pay for this.
Back to the hamburger. When you raise the price, demand goes down.
Oh, temporarily,
but not
not all the time. That's what I was challenging, the laws of supply and demand. They're not as simple. They're really not laws. They're more principles. I believe in supply and demand, and I believe in free enterprise, but I also believe that it is not necessarily everything that we want it to be. It has to be controlled. It has to be influenced. There has to be a compromise between laissez-faire and utter totalitarian government.
But I think you probably will admit that there is a very natural tendency toward demand to decrease with an increase in price.
Yes, and I'm saying that in some cases that's acceptable.
In my way of thinking, I believe that whenever you start interrupting the nature of things, you begin to cause problems. Look what we've done with forest management and the Great Lakes.
But even like with your hamburger thing, if you raise the minimum wage of that worker that's working there right now, they can't afford to eat at McDonald's. If their wages are up a little, they actually may start buying food there. It could actually increase. And as far as supply and demand, it depends upon the economist you talk to, because you can read both sides of it.
I know. I don't think I've ever done research on a topic that was more politically loaded than this one.
It is.
It's even worse than affirmative action, because there are people that just that come up with numbers all over the place and all. But thank you very much. What an excellent discussion. And I want to thank everybody for joining us, and I'd like to leave you with this quote that you two haven't seen yet. This is the quote: when truth and ideology collide, civility is essential for finding common ground. That is from Anonymous, or yours truly, depending on whether or not you like it. Thank you very much.